Bom dia a todos.
Good morning.
Good morning, yes, sorry.
It's a multilingual group, most likely.
Yes. Okay. We will wait a little bit for the hour. Okay, Tiama Paul, I see you here from the program also.
I'm here.
Seray Kilic also, good morning. Josif, Gjani, not yet. Jonida, Balia, and Belen. Okay, we're still missing two presenters. Let's wait a little bit more. Andrea Soares is here. She's the host. So if you have some issue, technical issue, you could chat with her directly. I think she will stay during the session. Otherwise, you can contact me also.
Let's hope that there will be no technical problems.
Yes, I don't foresee that. So, which locations, Timia Paul, you are?
I am currently in Budapest.
Okay.
And I have family here, and I came to visit. And due to the virus, I got stuck for a while, longer than I expected to.
Okay.
But I'm generally located in Lisbon.
Ah, okay. Oh yes, so from Say, yes, of course. I didn't see your
affiliation.
Yes. And Seray, you located where? Sorry, I can't hear you. It's just low. It's working, but it's just low. Maybe it's on my side, but.
I also cannot hear her.
Exactly. I thought, yeah. I'm going to turn on the lights so that there's not so much shadow on my image. 1 second.
It's still a bit low. Unfortunately not. Did you try the volume on the microphone on your computer? Yeah. Could it be your headphones? Do you have a mic on your headphone? Not yet. I'm not sure if the technical person, Andrea Soares, would be able to give you some advice. If not, I would try without the headphones to see if it's better.
Okay, I think it's a little bit better like this. And Jonida Bala, good morning. Good morning. We don't hear you. We don't hear you.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
Sorry, it was mute. So
All
I'm
right.
Balia. I'm from Tirana, Albania, and I am representing also my co-writer because we are two persons, but the other one is working now, so I'm presenting the paper. And yeah, good
Okay.
morning.
Good
Here it is,
morning. Welcome.
10 o'clock. I thought it was the Lisbon time. I have 1 or 2 hours waiting here.
Okay. And then Belen Perianes from Spain. Let's see if she comes at some time during our panel. She's also the last on the list, so maybe she might be able to join us and present the paper.
Can you hear me now?
A little better, but yeah.
Low?
Yes. Maybe during your presentation, you will need to speak to the microphone line carefully. Okay. So it's 9 o'clock. I guess we will start the panel. So I'm Ricardo Sousa, a professor at Autonomous University. I'm also a member of the Research Center Observare that is co-organizing this event. I will moderate this panel, and I will propose that we would follow the order of the papers in the program. We have 4 papers for a time of 2 hours. So I think we can be a little bit flexible with the time allocated for each presentation. Maybe go to the maximum of 20 minutes, 15 to 20 minutes. I think it would be okay. That would allow us to have, 1 hour or a little bit less of debate afterwards. I think you would agree that it's better to have the questions at the end of all presentations. So the panel is on neighborhoods of the European Union. What is wrong with it? We have 4 presentations. I won't be able to introduce the speakers because I don't actually have their CV. But if the speakers want to give a bit introduction to their work or their positions, they are welcome. I will start with Timmy Powell with a paper on differentiation in the EU relations with its eastern neighbors, what implications for the promotion of labor standards. And so the floor is yours.
Thank you. Good morning to everyone. Thank you for having me at the conference, and thank you for joining us in this panel this morning. I am an integrated researcher affiliated with the Center for International Studies at IUGM-UNED. I started working there a few years ago. Before that, I had a very international career, as most of us probably did, but I'm originally from Hungary. So I'm a bit knowledgeable about the Eastern neighborhood, but I'm not an expert on Eurasian societies at large. Let me just pull up the slides to make sure that everything is okay, and I dwell into the presentation immediately. Let me see if it works. Let me just, is the share screen. Can you all see the slides? Yes, and you can hear me as well. So before I start presenting the actual work, I would just like to say that the presentation is based on a larger research project that I have been working on over the past years that looks at the ability of the EU to promote labor standards through its trade policy, in developing countries in general. So the presentation that I am giving today is based on some of the main findings that emerged from the work that I did on the Eastern Neighborhood. And for the sake of this conference, I extended the analysis to include the Central Asian economies as well, to speak better to the question at hand that I will mention in a minute. But I just want to specify here that as far as the region and the countries that I'm referring to in this presentation include the formal Eastern Partnership countries, so Armenia, Azerbaijan, Belarus, Georgia, Moldova, and the Ukraine. And as a point of reference, as a point of comparison for a different political cooperation and economic integration model that the EU has been pursuing, I also extend the analysis to the Central Asian economies that includes Kazakhstan, Kyrgyz Republic, Tajikistan, Turkmenistan, and Uzbekistan. So in the policy and academic arenas, primarily in the United States and the European Union, there has been this ongoing debate about the extent and manners in which trade can be used as an instrument to promote so-called non-trade related policy objectives, such as labor standards, democratization, and human rights. And my work is focused very much on labor standards. And by labor standards, I mean fundamental labor rights, such as freedom of association and collective bargaining, elimination of child labor, abolition of forced labor, and the non-discrimination at the workplace. So these are the core ILO conventions. These are oftentimes referred to as the primary labor standards. And then there is a group of secondary labor standards that are related primarily to the conditions of work at the workplace. So the existence of minimum wage, the existence of a maximum threshold for overtime, health and safety conditions, and these are pretty much it, and the formality of the labor contracts. So this is what I mean when I speak about labor standards in general. And in this debate, as I mentioned, the policy and academic debate, there are essentially three main approaches through which different policymakers and scholars have looked at how trade can be an instrument for promoting labor standard that corresponds to very different type of governance actors, different level of interactions across economies. The first one refers to the inclusion of so-called labor provisions or labor standards in international trade or other forms of formal political agreements. So this is very much state-centered. It looks at the ability of one state, generally these advanced fair trade regimes like the EU or the US, to transfer its rules, including labor standards, on its trade partners. Both the EU and the US has this long history of including labor standards in its trade agreements. It started out with the preferential trade agreements already in the 1990s, and this trend has intensified and consolidated over time, as illustrated by the so-called new generation of trade agreements that have emerged over the past decade or so, that have separate chapters on trade and sustainable development issues, that generally asks for not only adherence, signing ratification of the ILO standards, but also has stipulations regarding their implementation, and introduces these new governance structures to involve civil society organizations to achieve better implementation and monitoring. So this is kind of the trend in this governance approach. And as far as in the academic literature, studies in this area are very much related to these debates about the EU as a global actor and the EU as a normative power, in the sense of, again, like exporting its rules through its trade policy. And the second approach refers to very different type of actors. It looks primarily at the ability of so-called lead firms that are generally main brand companies from advanced economies, but increasingly also emerging markets as China and other economies are catching up in many sectors. But the main infrastructure here is market integration at the formal and practical level. It primarily takes place in the framework of these global value chains. These are these new predominant modes of production that have emerged since the 1990s. And due to consumer and stakeholder pressures, a lot of the brand companies from these advanced economies started to impose conditions for sourcing from developing countries, introducing these labor and environmental standards as a condition to have contractual relationships with them. So there's a lot of work in this area as well, but the trend in general in this part, in this governance system, is to better link sourcing decisions of lead firms with sustainability performance. So there are a lot of companies are introducing these scorecards that if some suppliers are doing better, so not only meeting the minimum standards, but if they are doing extraordinarily well in providing better working conditions for their workers, to kind of reward them with additional contracts. Because a lot of the debate, as you will see in both of these in these literatures, is centers around the use of appropriate incentives and conditionality approaches. But a larger question that hasn't been appropriately explored in this literature is how does these regional integration models that the EU pursues through its trade policies with different groups of countries influence these broader dynamics around labor standards, and which, if any, of these governance approaches is driving change on the ground. So to provide at least a partial answer to this broader question, I look at the Eastern neighboring countries that, as I mentioned, is interpreted here in a broad sense to include both the formal Eastern Partnership countries and the Central Asian economies. I think it's a very appropriate empirical framework to start thinking about this problem for several reasons. So the first reason is that if we look at different measures of labor standards in this region in comparison to the EU or Russia as the other competing power in this area, we see a really interesting, a very important difference between the two, even though these economies are post-socialist economies where labor had a very significant political power in the past. Over time, labor standards really deteriorated as they went on with the restructuring of their economies. So on the first graph on the left, you see mapping out the average for the EU and the Eurasian regions. Just to give you some additional information about this score is that 0 means that very low labor standards, 2 means very high labor standards. So as you can see, there's a general downward trend in both of these regions, but there's a very significant difference between the EU and Eurasia. So in a way, there is a case for a normative purpose for the EU to promote its rules across through its trade policies in this region. A second reason that it's a very good empirical window to look at this region is that these countries have been the beneficiaries of a very advanced foreign policy tool, the European Neighbourhood policy that was launched in the beginning of the 2000s, that introduces a lot of incentives, material ones, and also these soft measures to promote reforms. So it's an excellent test to examine to what extent these tools are indeed effective in promoting any change on ground. Thirdly, it's also at the ENPs obviously corresponds to this more formal governance approach, but also at the practical level, there are a lot of these economies from Eurasia, as you can see on the graph to the right, are highly integrated or very reliant on exports to the EU. So the graph shows the share of EU exports in total exports. And as you can see, a lot of these countries reaches at least 30%, but it's especially high in Moldova, Ukraine, Azerbaijan, and Kazakhstan. And fourthly, it's also an interesting region, as I mentioned earlier, that there is this competing regime, which is Russia and its newly established Eurasian Economic Union, that is in many cases undermining the ability of the EU to influence this region. So for all these reasons, I think the Eurasian economies and the Eastern neighboring countries are an excellent empirical window to start looking at how different political cooperation and economic integration models influence labor standards in general. So going forward, the first part of the presentation will provide some additional details about the tools that are used in the framework of this European neighborhood policy that corresponds to this political governance mechanism. And then I will proceed to discuss some of the details of the EU at the market integration at this practical, informal level, at the firm level, that sort of indicates the possibilities and limitations to the extent that the EU can be serving as a diffusing force of labor standards at this interfirm level. These two aspects, these two governance systems are obviously somewhat interrelated in the sense that formal agreements oftentimes lead to the expansion of trade, and vice versa. Expansion of trade oftentimes, increases the interest of countries to conclude formal agreements. But analytically, it's important to keep them separate because they really correspond to very different governance actors, to rather different dynamics, and they have drastically different policy implications. And thirdly, in the third part of the presentation, I will look at how these different EU governance modes map out to the evolution of labor standards in the Eurasian economies. And I use these kind of broad indicators to depict the regional trends over time and across these different groups of countries that I will introduce in a minute. But I used a specific case of Moldova to shed light on some of the mechanisms through which the EU governance mechanisms are linked, EU governance systems are linked to the evolution of labor standards. I've conducted significant field work in this country, and I know it rather well through my previous research as well. So on the first part of the analysis, let me just remind you that in this debate on the inclusion of labor standards in formal agreements, one of the main debates is around the use of the incentives and conditionality to promote reforms among the trade partners. A significant criticism is that not enough material incentives are used, or that are not linked sufficiently well to reforms on such issues as democratization, human rights, or labor standards. But then some authors point out that notwithstanding these deficiencies, even the use of these softer instruments, technical and financial assistance and political dialogue, is conducive already to produce some incremental but over time and rather sustainable change in this country. So this is kind of how the debate is set up on which tools are relevant and how important are these hard incentives. So in light of this debate, let me just say a few things about the ENP, as I think it will be relevant to understand its influence on the evolution of labor standards. So the ENP was based on institutionally and legally on these formal agreements, these partnership and cooperation agreements that the EU concluded with Eurasian economies in general at the end of the 1990s to promote market reforms and democratic reforms in the region. But the ENP, its launch in 2004, after an introduction period starting from 2003, really upped the incentives that were provided. So its main objective was to promote a set of very ambitious social, economic, and political reforms, given the change in the borders of the EU in the east, but then later on, due to member state politics, was extended also to the southern neighborhood. So it includes both east and southern neighboring countries. But its underlying principle was to offer a greater access to the EU market, this large market with a lot of consumers that can fuel economic development in these countries in exchange of reforms in several sectoral areas. So the incentives that the ENP introduced really meant a significant upgrading in the incentives. So it's oftentimes referred to as the 3 M's. It used a combination of markets, money, and mobility to encourage reforms. Markets that came later on in the form of the possibility to sign these deep and comprehensive free trade agreements, which is well, there was already a lot of liberalization of trade taking place to other tools that the EU had at its hand, but it really liberalizes access of these countries in the agriculture sector, which the EU is generally rather protective of. And the second main incentive was a significant upgrading of financial assistance provided by the EU in the form of the European Neighbourhood instrument, which meant a significant expansion of the funding that the EU provided, with a part of it directed to the funding of these technical programs of state building, the twinning, TAIEX, and Sigma, that were developed during the enlargement, and they were very successful in building institutional capacity in the new member states to adopt reforms. And thirdly, it also used mobility agreements to liberalize the movement of the citizens as another source of incentive to encourage especially very sensitive type of reforms later on. And finally, the PCAs already had some infrastructure for political dialogue through these cooperation councils and committees that met on a yearly basis. But an important building block of the ENP were these ENP action plans that were bilaterally negotiated political documents specifying more specific commitments to the kind of reforms that these countries sign up. And as a result of making such explicit commitments, new subcommittees were introduced to provide additional policy learning and advice, and also to monitor the extent of progress using the yearly assessment progress, which were these rather detailed reports on how much progress is taking place across different sectoral areas, including labor standards. So as the ENP was met with a lot of criticism in not reaching some of these very ambitious objectives, there was an increasing demand for greater differentiation, especially with respect to the eastern and the southern neighborhoods. So as a result of this and some strategic maneuvering by key member states, in the case of the Eastern Partnership by Poland and Sweden in particular, the Eastern Partnership was launched in 2009. So this Eastern Partnership introduces some additional incentives, some new features in the governance mechanism, but I think these were more focused, and they are more relevant for other sectoral areas. For labor, they had this broader commitment on aligning with sustainable development goals, but it's not so relevant for the labor, so I don't want to spend too much time on it. I think what's important to say here is that in the scholarly literature analyzing the EAP, it became very clear that you have this differentiation within the EAP. So you have some countries, that are starting to align on a closer integration model, closer market integration and closer political cooperation model with the EU, while other ones are being more reluctant, more laggard in this respect. So building on this work and analyzing in detail the tools that the EU has used for promoting reforms in general, but for promoting labor standard reforms in particular, I identify these three categories of countries. The first one refers to the willing Eastern Partnership countries, that includes Armenia, at least until 2014, when it made a strategic decision not to sign a DCFTA, but join the Eurasian Economic Union set up by Russia and Belarus, but includes Georgia, Moldova, and the Ukraine. Already? Oh, okay. So this is one of the first group of countries that benefited most of the financial assistance, also benefited from the mobility agreements to the greatest extent, and they went on to sign this DCFTA, which meant an significant upgrading the labor governance model as well. The reluctant EAPs is a more diverse group. Belarus was one of the first recipients of the negative conditionality from the EU. It got kicked out from a lot of the governance mechanisms set up by the ENP in the first place, because it wasn't adopting sufficient reforms in the human rights and political rights area. And the third one is the Central Asian one, which has the least amount of these hard and soft instruments that the EU has been deploying to promote reforms, especially in the area of labor reforms. So proceeding to the second governance approach at the market level, here a key debate was to what extent exporting to such markets like the EU, that is a large market with very stringent labor standards and other regulatory standards, can set in motion this upgrading at the among trading partners due to incentives that firms face to benefit from economies of scale and to limit domestic competition, to raise their labor practices in their home societies. So this literature is generally referred to the race to the bottom versus race to the top literature, or California. It has different denomination. In the adjustments to the specific case of the EU, it got this Brussels effect denomination. So this literature already sets some basic conditions in what conditions this this diffusion of regulatory standards can take place, and labor standards did not initially meet these conditions, specifically because they are process and not product standards, so their monitoring is more difficult at the point of entry. But then later studies pointed out that because of the existence of these private regulation efforts by lead firms that monitor more rigorously their suppliers, this can meet this gap in the conditions set for this race to the top mechanism to take place, and this Brussels or California effect was noticed in the area of labor standards as well. But I think when you look at the integration at the market level of these Eastern European countries, it's important to remember that actually these economies do not very well satisfy other aspects of these conditions for the Brussels effect to take place. So the EU indeed has very high labor standards in general, as we saw in that original graph that I showed you, but actually there's a lot of differentiation among member states. In particular, there's the division between the old and the new member states, with the old ones having higher and the new ones having lower lower labor standards. So that to the extent that you're exporting to the wrong country, this diffusion effect is less likely to take place. And the second limitation is that it's very important to look at which sectors that they are integrated into. This lead firm influence is more likely to take place in certain sectors, and it's totally absent in other ones. So while at the first look, this is just a modification of the first graph that I showed you, it might seem that because these economies are very reliant on exporting to the EU, that there could be this beneficial influence through the diffusion of labor standards from the EU. When you look at the structure of trade, you realize that the share of trade that goes to these high standard economies, the more Western economies in the EU, it's actually much lower. So for example, only Kazakhstan satisfies this condition that it only exports these higher labor standard economies, Italy, Netherlands, and France. But in most cases, this is a much more mixed package. Like in the case of Moldova, for example, the bulk goes to Romania, that, you know, it's making progress on labor standards, but definitely not as advanced as, for example, Germany or Sweden. And also in the structure of the products, you see that, you know, not a lot of them satisfy this condition. Fuels, for example, are not an area where you would see the conditions taking place. So just moving on, there are a lot of ways that you could look at the evolution of labor standards in this region, but using the city indicator that I described initially, you see indeed that there is a differentiation between the reluctant and the willing EAPs that accentuated as with the launch of the EMP. There is a decline at the end because of the developments of the Ukraine, and Ukraine being the biggest country here resulted in this downward shift. I'm sorry, I thought that we had 20 minutes. That's why I took it a little bit slower. So essentially, so you see this differentiation indeed taking place in the evolution of labor standards, and relying on the case of Moldova, you see that indeed the political governance system is the one that does the most effect. There's some limitation in how this influences labor standards on ground, but perhaps I can shed some more light as we proceed with the Q&A. So I would leave more time for my colleagues. So thank you. We can't hear you, I'm sorry.
Yes, it was 20 minutes.
Oh,
22.
sorry.
Yes, okay.
How it flies.
It's always difficult, but thank you very much. I'm sure we're going to have opportunity to go further on your thoughts in the period of question and answers. But I'd like to now ask Seray Kilic. I hope your microphone is better now. It's low, huh? It's low. I don't know if my colleagues, other people also hear me. Okay. Okay, I'll present the presentation. The presentation is on building resilience in the neighborhood, securitization on the agenda. And I would ask Timia to end the sharing. Thank you. Maybe you can follow up on some ideas in the question and answer section. So now I would like to give the floor to Jonida. I see you here. Jonida Bala. She will present on the EU after the BRICS exits, new options for differentiated integration. So please, welcome.
Yes. Yeah, my name is Jonida Bala, and I wrote the paper together with Josif, Gjani, he is an EU expert. I am still not, but I have been working in different EU projects and in the public administration, Albanian one, because I'm from Albania, and Josip also. And we are living in Tirana in Albania. And I have a master global studies from the Gothenburg University in Sweden, and I own a bachelor degree in political science. The paper is going to talk about the EU enlargement process after the Brexit, because it was thought like Brexit will stop the European integration, but we have analyzed some evidences from the Western Balkans steps and EU integration process that the integration and enlargement process is continuing and with different speeds for the countries, and the paper will make a little bit of the theory of European integration in the Western Balkans and what are the recent developments there. And for example, for me, 5 years ago, I was thinking, being from Albania, that maybe the European integration of these countries was done in a group altogether, but now we have seen some differentiation in the process of European integration of these countries, and some competition policies have emerged inside the countries. So where the European integration started in the Western Balkans? It started immediately after the fall of communism, when the dissolution of the Yugoslav Republic, different republics, it was done in 1992. In Albania, it started in the 1991, but officially it started in 2003 with the summit of Thessaloniki in Greece, when the EU started the stabilization and association process for these countries. So in the 90s, there were these ethnic conflicts, everything that happened is in Bosnia and then in Kosovo and in Macedonia. So it started officially in 2003, and the European integration process, it was thought like during the time like a stabilization and association process. So the main, if we analyze the external policy of the EU during that time, it was to have a common legal framework first, and then to initiate the process of integration process. So there were signed some stabilization association agreements that were signed in 1999, but they were in place in 2003, and they took some elements of the accession process. Nowadays, we are very close to the European integration, although there have been some developments, but the contractual relationship with the European Union, it has remained on 4 main pillars, as we may call. It is first the contractual relationship that all countries have signed with the European Union. There are the trade relations that Meiiado talked a little bit at the first presentation, the trade relations, autonomous trade measures that the countries should have. There is the financial assistance and the regional cooperation, the 4th component, the good neighborhood relationship. But as I will show together with Josif, that is not here, the financial assistance has taken the prerogative. All these steps have been done, but as an incentive that European Union has used mostly by evidence, not as a contractual or as a general agreement, it is the financial assistance and regional cooperation are much more visible in these countries than the first too, although they have happened, but as an incentive, as an external policy incentive of European Union, it is much more the financial assistance. What kind of methods we have used? The study of European financial assistance is a very complex process, since it involves many levels of government, many institutions, many sectors, and it is also now it has become so regional because many countries need to be participant in a project, and they need to get the funding all together. They are the biggest project, and they bring much more development and much more money in the Western Balkans. However, if we, I didn't prepare my PowerPoint presentation. I prepared it, but without any graphs. Sorry for that. But if we see the graphs in the funds that are allocated for the Western Balkans in the last years, they have received very little. So allocation is very big, but the absorption capacities of these countries are very low. So maybe something has missed, but even the political elites seems they are not so much interested in gaining these funds. Because in case I have studied Albania, for example, the EU financial assistance is not the major. It seems like a lot of money they are giving or something like that. But if we see the budget in Albania, the money that are coming from European Union are only 5% of the yearly income of the budget. So most of the incomes are coming from the internal resources of the country, and only 5% are all the financial assistance that our other countries are giving. So this is like a good rhetoric of the European Union, but even the countries have their own responsibilities because they don't engage in getting these funds. But for them, it's very difficult to get the funds because there are a lot of conditions that should they have, even the employees that they don't have the human capacities, so they don't get the funds. How the EU is giving these funds to the Western Balkans? Through the horizontal support, regional structures, regional investment support, and territorial cooperation. So they, as we may see from the EU is focusing more on regional cooperation than in countries' necessities alone. So 3 out of 4 IPA program components are focused in the Western Balkan as a region. So this is a problem that the national financial assistance is implemented through the regional cooperation and support. And various structures have been created in the last years. If we see theoretically, this has been studied even during the first Big Bang enlargement in 2004, when the Central and European countries adhered in the European Union, and there were Schim, Felling, and Sedelmaier in 2004 that recognized that European Union used as his external policy 3 main methods: the external incentive model that is now being used also in the Western Balkan countries, the social learning model, it's not so much during these days, and model of lessons learned. I have seen by my own, but we can provide also evidence that there are some model of lessons learned now, but it's very difficult also to be implemented. The main method remains the incentive of external model, the external incentive model, when they use the financial assistance to enhance in this country the possibility to be integrated in the future in the EU. So the speed and the reward of these incentives, financial incentives, is giving the face of the European integration in the Western Balkans. And for these reasons, these two other, for these reasons, but the European integration process in these countries has been problematic, but it has been problematic since before. There are many authors who argue that these countries were backward even before joining the integration process, EU integration process. They started their journey with internal and ethnic conflicts, and they had even the EU itself faced some problems with a big enlargement in 2004. So they accepted 10 countries, and now they are having problems with that. And for these countries, for the Western European countries, now there are 30 years of trying to be part of European Union, which is a very long process by considering now it is more than 30 years of attempts to be part of European Union and still very few results. But something needs to change in the European Union itself, of its policy. Maybe they need to not use anymore the external incentive model. And I use some idea from a band who says that he used the open method of coordination, that adds much more accountability to the EU itself. So through this this open method of coordination, maybe there can be also some competition about these countries and to not consider them as a group, but to put some competition between themselves in order to make a differentiated integration of these countries in order for them to be much more responsible in their actions, and even the EU and even the countries in order to be much more fast in the development of these countries. Our main, now I'm finishing a little bit, but our main me and Josif discovered that the regional cooperation policy of the European Union towards the Western Balkans has created a problem that it is very elitist in this structure, because it helps only the elite in these countries, and through the regional cooperation, the elites in the Western Balkans have become much more close. But these elites, through definition and evidence, they are not so much democratic, and they are a little bit corrupted. So the political elites have been very close during these last years. At the same time, the European Union is implementing an elitist policy in these countries, so it has created only an integration of the corrupted elites of these countries. So for this reason, something needs to change in the approach that EU is using towards this country, and to make much more accountable their policies. So a little bit, this is what we have done.
Okay, so the first presenter that didn't use all the time, thank you very much. So I will now pass on to Belen Perianes, that I see here already present. Yes. Welcome. So as I said in the beginning before you join us, I would appreciate if you could just present yourself. I don't have your biography or something. And you will be presenting in a maximum period of 20 minutes or so on the challenges and prospects for the future of the EU relations in Central Asia, the special case of Kazakhstan. So the floor is yours. Welcome.
So, thank you very much. Can you hear me well? Thank you. Good morning from Madrid. I'm very happy to be today with you. I'm a doctor in peace and international security. I'm working as postdoctoral researcher at the University Institute General Gutierrez Meiiado in Madrid. So I'm more and more interested in Central Asia. So I will share a PowerPoint. I promise to try to present this presentation in 15 or 20 minutes as maximum. So can you see well the PowerPoint?
We do. It would be better if you could remove the bar. If you just click on the right side, yeah, a little bit lower on the right, but on the bar, there's this arrow up.
Yes.
A little bit, no.
No, I'm sorry.
To the right, the other end.
Sorry. It's
okay. This one is better. Yeah, sure.
Okay, sorry, and thank you very much. So this is an ongoing research for the paper. I want to focus on the coherence of the European Union normative principles in its relation with Central Asia, and I will highlight the main ideas of my paper. At first, I will speak about the background research. I want to know that the EU and Central Asia have traditionally have a reduced mutual interest between them. We have to know that to know the basis of the different social, cultural, economic characteristics in both parts and in which both parts are founded. For instance, the EU is an advanced form of political cooperation, and this is not the case of the 5 states of Central Asia. The institutional framework for the EU relations in Central Asia is the 2019 EU strategy on Central Asia. This strategy is based on a couple of key documents, political documents. They are the global strategy for the EU's foreign and security policy and connecting Europe and Asia, the connectivity strategy. Also, another key concept for this research is the Eurostandard concept of connectivity. This is very important concept because China and Russia are promoting their own understandings of connectivity, which are much different from the European one. The Eurostandard concept of connectivity is based on economically, fiscally, environmentally, and socially sustainability in the long term, and also is based on the human dimensions and people interests and rights. For instance, providing networks of transport links, and also the people-to-people projects are very important. And also in these Euro standards, open and transparent procurement processes are another key issue. So I will continue with this presentation. Central Asia is not a priority of the EU external affairs, but it is very important to know that it's an important niche topic for the European Union. At present, the EU is the main economic partner of Central Asia. But by contrast, the total turnover of the EU trade with Central Asia remains low. It it should be known that China is the main trading partner of Kyrgyzstan, Turkmenistan and Uzbekistan, and I will continue with trade relations. We can see in this image how are the EU Central Asia trade in goods. Central Asia exports to the EU are focused on few commodities, especially crude oil, gas, metals, and cotton feed. And on the other hand, EU exports to Central Asia are focused on machinery, transport equipment, and other manufactured goods. These products account for more than half of EU exports to the region. We can see that the balance in this image is negative for the EU. We can see also in this image that how are the EU Central Asia relations in trade. The EU is Kazakhstan's main trading partner and investors, and we will have the opportunity later to focus more on Kazakhstan. Central Asia main trade partners, we can see that how are in the image in the left. So I think that I will advance because I have to speak 7 minutes. And there are, regarding the institutional framework for cooperations, the EU and Central Asia.
You have 13 minutes. 13.
Ah, okay. The EU and Central Asia countries have been negotiating partnerships and cooperation agreements. These kind of agreements are the general scope for cooperation between Central Asia and the EU. These partnerships and cooperation agreements are focused on political dialogue, trade in goods, cross-border supply of service, and also provisions that affect business and investments, including labor conditions. And other areas. Partnership and cooperation agreements are not preferential, but they focus on most favored nation treatment in bilateral trade. It is very important that there is another kind of institutional cooperation, that is the enhanced partnership and cooperation agreement, that this elevate relations to a new level. Partnerships and cooperations agreements, which is PCAs, governs the use bilateral trade relations with the Kyrgyz Republic, Tajikistan, and Uzbekistan, and they give favorable access to the EU market throughout the generalized scheme of preferences for upper middle level economies, so they can't benefit from this scheme. But from the part of Kyrgyzstan, they profit from the GSP Plus scheme with grants, additional preferences. We can see in this image how are which are the EU agreements with Central Asia countries. It is very important regarding Kazakhstan that the Enhanced Partnership and Cooperation Agreement entered into force in March 2020. Also, development aid is another key point of the EU Central Asian relations. The EU Development Cooperation Instrument grant funding is 1.1 billion euro. Regarding the size of populations, Central Asia gets much more funding than other regions, with much more the focus of the European Union, such as maybe countries of the Middle East or Africa. Kazakhstan and Turkmenistan participate only in regional programs because they are upper middle income countries. We can see in this image how is the EU donor role in Central Asia, but I will advance. I will focus. There are two key documents, institutional documents for the EU Central Asian relations. The first strategy was adopted in 2007, and the last one was adopted in the last year, in 2019, because of developments that were taking place in the region. I will advance for external challenges from the part of the EU. These challenges can economize the external policy vectors of the European Union. For instance, the level of internal cohesion in the European Union determine the role its role towards other regions. There is a lack of political cohesion or cohesion and political unity in the European Union, so which is a challenge for this issue. The EU coherence diminishes the internal, the overall positions, and also the image of the European Union in the world. There are the member states, the EU member states have divergent interests and different regional interests. So there is a need of political unity. Other factors have the huge institutional heterogeneity of the member states and fragmentation of the public perception. The British exit, the Brexit, is another challenge because we don't know what is going to happen in the future. So we don't know how is this going to affect the external projection of the European Union. And we have also the COVID-19 outbreak in the European Union. So we don't know how this is going to affect the EU domestic policies. And also there is an increasing populism and Euroscepticism at the European level. Regarding the internal challenges from the part of Central Asia, the Central Asian connectivity, the Soviet legacy make that cause and complete over important loss of infrastructure networks in this region. And also there was the industrialization of the region. There is an inefficiency of its borders, and also a corruption, informal and clientelistic networks. This is a key challenge for this region. Also, regarding the impact of the European assistance of Central Asia education field, the European Union frequently has a one-size-fits-all approach. That this is not a good point because this disregard the region's diversity. Just 5 minutes. There is a problem trying to transfer the Western systems to other regions because they have different values and contexts. And also the special case of Kazakhstan. Sorry, this is the first country that has signed an enhanced partnership and cooperation agreement. Kazakhstan is the first trade partner of the European Union in this region. This is a very important country for the European Union because Kazakhstan has a growing importance as an oil and gas supplier for the European Union. This country benefits from a strong foreign direct investment. The Caspian region is the third largest oil and gas deposits in the world, and the energy resources are reshaping the map of influence in Eurasia. This is very important for the European Union because the European Union, as we can see here, want to regarding the relations between Russia and Western countries, the European Union is very interested in alternative oil and gas sources, and also to expand the network of pipelines to different markets. This is a geopolitical game in Central Asia. The European Union is looking for their energy security. I think that I have two more minutes, so I will focus in the paper about the challenges of Kazakhstan energy cooperation with the European Union, such as the energy sector is not environmentally friendly and sustainable for the country, and this is a very important problem for Kazakhstan and for the region. I will finish with 2 slides. The key points, the EU will remain only as one of the several important players in Central Asia. The EU must be realistic about what will be able to achieve in this region. The EU needs to decide which is the best format of cooperation. Regarding, I have speak about the divergent interest of the EU member states, and also it is very important that the EU should put the emphasis of its work in the region on working together instead of teaching to life. There are highly sensitive political issues. So this is very sensitive. Maybe issues regarding democracy and corruption, etc. So the European Union must be coherent with its normative principles in its relations with Central Asia. We say that the EU is looking for energy security and in this region, but the EU must respect its normative powers of democracy, etc. And I think that the Euro standards of connectivity can be the most powerful difference with other regional powers. The EU should also respond to local social and economic needs beyond the cooperation with ruling elites. And I think that the so-called less sensitive policies like education and science can be a win-win field. And thank you for your time.
Thank you for your presentation. So it's on my clock 10:25. Our panel is supposed to go up to 11, maybe 10 minutes before, so that we can have a break before the next panel. I will open the floor now for questions and answers. I don't know if someone would like to present some question. You can, I don't know, just signal in your camera or just sign with those reactions from Zoom. Identify your intention. Okay, Seray Kilic would like to pose a question. You have to turn on the...
Yes. Can you hear me? Thank you very much for the presentation. I have a question. Sorry, I have come late, so I just listened the last presentation comprehensively. My question is about the Kazakhstan, the European Union and Central Asia relations. You mentioned that there is also China and Russian influence in the Central Asia, and as you know that China has a Belt and Road initiatives, and there is also with Russia and China there is a greater Euro-Asian initiatives. So my question is, what do you think about the European Union policies effects, the foreign policy effects on the Central Asia in terms of the Chinese and Russian influence, specifically Belt and Road initiatives? Do you think that European Union policies, normative power politics, clash with the Chinese Belt and Road initiatives in Central Asia? Also the Russians' policies about the Greater Eurasian initiatives. Thank you.
Thank you. Maybe we collect one or two more questions. I don't know if any of the, even the presenters could make questions, but otherwise we would let Anna answer the question. Turn on the mic, turn on.
So what I think I'm working in this issue. What I think that the European Union has a very limited role in this region is what I think by now. But this Euro-standard concept of connectivity is much more focused on people-to-people projects. These people-to-people projects are focused on, I think, from my perspective, I think that is a positive or maybe, I don't know how to explain. I want to say that people-to-people projects are more focused on human rights, maybe are based on the normative principles of the European Union. Also, they are very focused on the fight against climate change. They are focused on being more, this concept is focused on being environmentally friendly, must be respectful with the environment, and this kind of things. From my point of view, the Chinese projects in the Belt and Road Initiative have not this this perspective. So also, I think that is very necessary to promote transparency. Also, transparency in a segment as is a segment of public procurements on the projects. I don't know if I explain it to you, but this is, I think that the European Union role is very limited by the moment. But I think that this is balancing the Russian and the Chinese role in the region, or can balance in the future. So I don't know if the person that asked. So thank you.
Seray is mentioning he is okay with the answer, or if he would like to talk again. Okay, your microphone is off if you are talking.
Okay, right now, thank you for your answers. I have also, if you want, I have another question to Seray. Although I haven't listened to her. My question is about her idea or opinion about the latest conflict in the East Mediterranean. Do you think that Turkey securitized the East Mediterranean issues, securitization, because your title is about securitization? Do you think that Turkey used the East Mediterranean issues in its domestic politics? As you know, that in Turkey has a lot of problems, and every day Turkey has for domestic politics a lot of new things happening, and also Turkey, in my opinion, has used the foreign policy issues in domestic politics. And like today, there is another incident like this Kobane incidents came to the Turkish domestic politics again, and East Mediterranean issues became almost casus belli between the Greece and Turkey, and France also involved. But right now we forget that. So maybe I talked a lot, but my question is the securitization of the East Mediterranean issues. What do you think about that? So maybe I talked a lot, but my question is
Okay. I don't know if someone has another question. I maybe take the opportunity. I have there's one question. Timia, yes,
Thank
please.
you. I wasn't sure which is the appropriate way of signaling the intent. Yeah, so I would like to build on the previous question to Anna, because she mentioned that there are these environmental issues that come up in relation with the EU. And I was just wondering if you could elaborate more on that. Like, does it translate into domestic discussions about the need to sort of upgrade environmental standards? And do you hear anything about labor standards? So there are a lot of criticism by international organizations about the lack of independent unions in the oil extraction sector. The EU is not so actively involved for reasons that I explained in my presentation. But I was wondering, do these issues come up at all in domestic debates, or kind of this availability to rely on China and Russia as alternative integration models kind of silence this debate? I also have questions for the other participants, unless there are other questions from the floor, but perhaps I will let Anna respond, and then, or how would you like to proceed, Ricardo?
Yeah, maybe we will wait for Anna reply, and then you can.
If there are no other questions.
Yeah, sure. The mic, Anna.
So can you ask me again? Sorry, I didn't understand.
Sorry, maybe I wasn't clear enough. You mentioned that environmental issues come up in relation between EU and Kazakhstan, and you dismissed its importance, but could you elaborate if this is a debate at all in the domestic sphere in Kazakhstan at all, environmental issues in the oil extraction sector, for example?
I think that is not from my perspective now. This is not being a debate by now. I think that I'm working in these issues, but from my perspective now, this is not an issue of the public debate. I think that this is a typical issue from the European Union. For instance, I'm Spanish, I'm from Spain, and here the fight against climate change, and I think also in the European Union, but maybe in the Brussels bubble, this is a typical issue from the Brussels bubble and also from several countries in the European Union. But I think I have spoken with people from other countries, and I think they told me that this is not in the public debate in their countries. In Spain, this is very important. So I'm really interested in this in Kazakhstan and Central Asia. So I will try to improve my knowledge or my research. Thank you.
Okay.
I also have a question for Jonida. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing her name right, because you suggested as the open method of coordination as an alternative governance approach between the EU and Albania and the other Western Balkan countries. But to my knowledge, the open method of coordination is very much based on this social learning and the sharing of best lessons, which you kind of discounted as important factors of influence in your discussion up until you presented your suggestions. So I was just wondering if you could clarify a little bit more on these interactions between the two. So do you find that the specific mechanism that the open method coordination relies on could be beneficial, and in what way for facilitating integration? And also I was wondering, like, are there resistances now in Albania to this integration project, given the long-term reluctance by several member states within the EU in continuing with the enlargement? Kind of what is the reaction in domestic politics in Albania to these dynamics? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. For the first question, as far as I have understood from the literature, there are three models that you mentioned for the external EU policy, which is external incentive model, the lessons learned, and the social cultural issues things. And it is another thing, the open method of coordination. It is from Benz, and he says that there are two main features of this method, which is the delegitimate theory, and the second one, it is the competitive method. According to him, there should be some competition for the EU policy to be much more accountable. So he analyzes this for the countries that are members of the European Union, not for the countries that want to be members. And until now, even yesterday, there was a declaration of the German Foreign Minister. He said that the Western Balkans is now has been used as a backyard of the European Union and not as part of European Union. But the last countries that opened the negotiation for membership were Albania and North Macedonia in March of 2020. So they opened the negotiation process now. And until now, they have used the external policy of the European Union towards the Western Balkans has been seen as an external foreign policy, not as part of European Union. But now, in order for the policies of European Union to be much more accountable, it is important to use other methods, because they have used until now the only external incentive model. It is very diffused in Albania as part of the financial assistance, as I explained in my paper. But the lessons learned have been used when they, as a feedback for their implementation of the policies. So now they are trying to use some lessons learned model, but they are not using the open method of coordination because there is no competition. There are only rewards. They give rewards, and sometimes the process goes in very speed. The rewards are in size and in speed. So sometimes the process goes very fast, sometimes it stops and there is a deadlock and it remains there. Sometimes it goes very fast. So this is the reward. They don't punish and they don't stop the process. So it's an ongoing process. For this reason, it is important to put, not to stop the process. I'm not against the EU, but should be some competition, much more accountable policies. That is my idea and the idea of the paper, together with Josif, to make the process much more accountable. That is missing. And to feel part of European Union, not just as a backyard of the European Union. This is how I explain it for the first question. The second one, the resistance. No, it's not yet. I would like to have some Eurosceptics in Albania, but there are not. In the polls, it is 90% or more that show that they want to be part of European Union. And politicians use this kind of thing in every election. They use a promise that we will integrate Albania in European Union. But after some time, their promises vanish and they start their own internal policies. So now the European Union, as I might say, they don't sustain the present government. They want another opposition or another party coming from the civil society, because we have political elites for 30 years. They are very much the same since the 1990s. They didn't change. So it's the same party going and the other party, but the same political elite. So it's important for the civil society to produce another political party that maybe wants to integrate in European Union, but to be another political elite. That is my opinion.
Okay, thank you. I don't know, it's a curiosity. It's not really the focus of the paper, but in the presentation of Timia, in some of the graphs, you would see that the conditions of labor and other civil rights have deteriorated also in the EU. And you actually even identify some reference points in the, I would ask Jonida to turn off the microphone, please. I wonder what is your explanation for that deterioration of the labor rights and civil rights that you identify even at the EU?
I think there is a general global trend in deterioration of the labor rights, and the factors are manifold. But I think one critical element is that, you know, in the past, it was labor unions, the organizations that were the main protecting organizations of labor rights. And that worked well in the industrialized societies with larger production units. But as the structure of the economies have changed towards services, new forms of employment are emerging, this model has to be rethought a little bit, like to what extent, you know, we need unions, or perhaps we need to strengthen labor inspectorates. So since these scores on labor standards give an overwhelming weight to the evolution of union rights, I think this also contributes to this declining trend from a methodological point of view, but also really because there is a need to shift the thinking or organization of how workers' interests are represented vis-a-vis with the employer, given all these changes in the economy that are taking place. So that would be my short answer from my perspective. This is really not my main focus, but I am involved in these debates on labor standards in general. Thank you for the question.
I don't know if someone has any other question. Well, if that's the case, that would give us 15 minutes more or less before the next panel to have a break. I want to thank the presenters, of course, for their very interesting papers, and also the questions that came from the audience. And the virtual room, the next panel, which is a general panel. Okay, thank you very much to all. Good day.
Thank you. Bye-bye.